Leeanne Puglisi Gangemi, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're welcome. I'm looking forward to having a chat.
Terrific. As am I. Just a preliminary comment. Recently had the pleasure of calling in and seeing you guys at your wonderful winery, Ballandean. Such a stunning setting. It had been a really long time since I'd been out there, but walked in, was blown away by the hospitalities, blown away by the setting, and probably most importantly to you guys, blown away by the quality of the wines. It was just a picture perfect day, and my only regret is I couldn't stay for way longer.
Well, we like to hear that. And, one of the things that's happened in the last 12 months particularly is the number of people who have visited the region it's their first time. And, we're hearing that a lot. People are saying, well, we just didn't realise how beautiful the area is and, the quality of the wines that are up here. And you're right, I think the hospitality is something that is a standout in our region. And, it's nice to hear it. So it makes you feel good when you think, people are commenting and you're doing the right thing. It's taken a long time. It feels like it's taken forever for people to finally work out what's going on in the Granite Belt. And it's nice to hear it when people express it. It's nice to hear.
Well, good. You'll be hearing it from me an awful lot. So let's talk about you. Let's talk about Ballandean. Let's talk about your family. One of the things that really attracts me to the wine industry, I'm a very familial, or you could say family orientated person. I love family. I've got a big family. I'm very close with my big family. Your Ballandean Estate, I see, it's quite a family affair. So your father,
yes.
Your mother, your sister, your husband, it's a family operation. I want to start with that. So,
yeah.
I mean, individuals are influenced by those who came before them. And I just want to know, how far back can you take your family's heritage? So there's Italian heritage. You said you've got two strong Sicilian names. Tell me a little bit about that.
So our great-grandfather arrived in Ballandean in the early 1920s. He arrived in the region and managed to buy this property in 1928. So my sister Robin and I are actually fourth generation here on the farm. So, yes, family has been very important to us. And being of Italian heritage, we grew up with our grandparents. They were very much part of the business as well when we were growing up. And we know our family history. We talk about our family history nearly every day in the Cellar door. People love to hear that story. And we are all very well aware, of how we got here, why we got here, what attracted great-granddad to Ballandean in the first place, and why we're still here. I suppose, my sister and I did have the opportunity to go away. It's not like mum and dad were expecting us to be a part of the business. Robin was away a lot longer than I was because I'm also the oldest of the cousins in our generation. So in a way, I felt a responsibility that it was my job to continue on with the family business, even though I was never put under that pressure. It was just me in my head. I thought, well, it's my role. And so I came back to the family business very quickly. And the history is amazing. And, what our great-grandfather, what our grandmother and grandfather went through, even what mum and dad have been through, that we're still here. I talk about even just the struggles that mum and dad had in the 80s, when Robin and I were at high school and, interest rates were extreme, and I don't know how we still own the farm, really. It was amazing what they went through. But I think one of the things that I often say to people about our family is that even though it was hard and, we went through wars, my grandfather and great-grandfather were threatened with internment, that kind of stuff, the children were not not that we weren't exposed to it, but we were never taught to kind of be resentful in any way. We were still grateful for what we had, even though there were many, many tough times throughout the journey. And I'm hoping that, the fifth generation, my two sons and my nephew and my niece, kind of feel the same way. And if they're interested in coming back, of which it looks like one is at the moment, and one of my sons looks like he's coming home to the business, I hope they feel the same way and respect the history and what the elders of our family have achieved over all of these years, nearly 100 years on the farm.
Yeah, that's huge. And I think very few people would probably appreciate that the Granite Belt and Queensland wine has that sort of a lengthy history and heritage. But can we just tap into, can you tell, what was it that brought your grandparents out here in the first place?
So great-granddad, he originally came to Australia in 1911. And, in those days, Italians were leaving by the truckload because it was just so bad in Italy. The life that they had there was awful. There was no work. And as my husband's grandfather used to tell me, when your children have got nothing to eat but lemons, you leave, because Sicily particularly is a very, very beautiful place. But there was too many people, not enough work, and the threat of war in 1911. So great-granddad came to Australia on his own, and then it looked like the war was going to break out. So he went back to Italy. And Dad always jokes, that his grandfather couldn't have been very far away from his wife because they managed to have 5 children during the war years. He was sent away and then came back. And then when the war was over, he said, I'm going back to Australia because that's where I think our family needs to be. So he headed back out and eventually called for 2 of his daughters to follow him out and help him build a life here. And they were in North Queensland originally. So they were in a little place called Moresby, which is just outside of Innisfail. And they worked there. They made enough money that they bought a little farm there. And they were there for a few years. And then eventually he called for another daughter to come out, which was my grandmother. So she was the 3rd daughter to head out. And in all that time, his wife never came to Australia. Their 4th child was a boy, and she deemed that he had to become a priest and that was never going to happen in Australia. So quite sad, really, that the family was split up over that move. And Nunu was out here with his 3 daughters. 2 of the girls got married in North Queensland. And then there was a big push to come to the Granite Belt. And the reason that it happened, the Italians were becoming more and more unwelcome in North Queensland. And this is something I found out many years later. A book was written about the history of the Italians in Stanthorpe, because, most people assume that the Italians came in the 50s after the Second World War, but there was a lot of Italians already in Australia, and a lot came to the Granite Belt in the early 20s. And so the soldier settlements that the government had given to the soldiers in the Granite Belt were not working. And the poor soldiers, people didn't know about PTSD in those days, and they were very sick and not making a success of the farms, and the banks were losing money. So there were some very clever bankers who realised there was an opportunity to go to North Queensland and ask these Italian families to take over these farms either on low or no interest loans. And that's how a lot of the Italians arrived. I always get the numbers wrong. It was either 21 families in 1922 or 22 families in 1921, whichever the way around it goes, all arrived taking over these soldier settlements around the Granite Belt. And so there was a huge community arrived from North Queensland in the Granite Belt, and that's kind of how they came. There were Italians here before. There was a priest here before in the late 1800s, Father Devati, who is considered, the father of viticulture and horticulture in the Granite Belt. So it was probably not an unknown region to the Italians. And when they got the opportunity to move here, great granddad was one of them. So he sold the farm in North Queensland and moved down with his daughter, my grandmother, the third daughter. The other two stayed in North Queensland. They were married by then, and eventually bought this farm. So a little bit of a different kind of take on why he arrived. Most people, like I said, thought that they came out after the Second World War, but there were some early adopters, I like to say, that came to Australia, saw it as a lucky country way before the majority of the Italians and Europeans came to Australia. So they were very well embedded into Australia by then. They were all naturalised, and in their opinion, they were Australians. So when the Second World War came along and, they were threatened with internment, it was a bit of pill to swallow.
I can't imagine what that would have been like. And I love hearing those stories. I've got a lot of Italian friends, a lot of close family friends who made similar journeys, and it's all about sacrifice and then finding these opportunities and then making the most of the opportunities. And you just stand back as an observer and see, firstly, that sacrifice, but then the dedication and hard work that goes into turning a really, you could call it a risky opportunity, into something beautiful and flourishing that you then pass on to those that come after you. And to me, that's just, there's very little in life that is more wonderful than that sort of story. Why wine? So they've gone to the Granite Belt, and you've said there was the priest that came out before. That makes a lot of sense to me. I'm a Catholic, sacramental wine, la-di-da.
Yep.
But when your ancestors settled in the Granite Belt, was wine the first thing that came to mind?
Not for sale, but for personal consumption, because the grapes were already here. And that was one of the other reasons that the Italians were attracted here. They didn't bring the grapes with them. The grapes were already being grown here. And if you go back a little bit further, the reason grapes were here, the government at the time, wherever new parts of Queensland were opening up, the government was giving them grapevines, any of the settlers. That's why there's a lot of grapevines in random places around the Darling Downs particularly, because they wanted to establish a wine industry to stop people drinking rum. Rum was a major problem. So they were trying to get people to grow grapes so that we could make wine. And that was one of the reasons grapes were in the Granite Belt, because it was identified as a place that, yes, they should grow really well up there. And then, of course, Father Devati took it the next step, and he, basically started a little industry up here, growing grapes and growing apples and whatever. So great-granddad, we had some grapevines around Ballandean, and he eventually planted some here as well. And, you do as you do when you're Italian, you make wine. And, as kids, my grandfather used to always say, well, I like to drink wine because I know what goes in it. I make it with my own hands. There's nothing foreign in it. And then he used to scare us with and what's in water, fish pee in water. So for a long time, I didn't want to drink water either because granddad told me that. But yeah, it's just the Italian way. You make wine for personal consumption. And then when great granddad was making a little bit with his daughter, with my grandmother, and then eventually when she got married, which in those days, she was 28 when my grandfather showed up in Ballandean to do some fruit picking. She would have been considered a spinster in those days, but she was working the farm with her father. She was one of the first women in the region to get a driver's license. She would take the old truck down and deliver fruit bins to the railway station to be sent to market in Brisbane. She was quite independent, for her time. And then, and then granddad showed up, I always joked to people that he was a backpacker. He'd come down from North Queensland to do some fruit picking just to make some extra money during the off season of the sugarcane. And he was a widower. He'd lost a wife not long earlier. And so, he was a widower. She was a spinster. They got together and the story continued. So we were very lucky, I suppose, that they found each other. She had been running the farm with her dad for a long time, and then Nunu came along, and knowing my grandfather, who's just like my father, he's a very headstrong man. So I'm not sure how the two of them managed, because I'm assuming I never met my grandmother, unfortunately. She'd passed before I was born, but for all accounts, she was a very strong woman as well. So I think that may have helped in helping the business or the farm succeed. They were both very strong people who had good work ethic and wanted to see the family happy and healthy and succeed in Australia. So, and in all this time, my great-grandmother was still alive and never came to Australia. She stayed in Italy the whole time. So it was tough times. But it's quite an amazing story. And wine was just kind of what you did with the seconds of the grapes. You sent the first part of the grapes went off to market, and then a lot of the table grapes that were being grown in the region, they produce a secondary crop. So the secondary crop, it's kind of not worth picking it for market, and they would make wine out of it or anything that was damaged. So by the time Granddad came along, Dad always says in the 30s and 40s and beyond, during the war and after the Second World War, they were making a lot of wine and sending it all over the place. North Queensland, it would be going out west of Queensland because there was a lot of European tobacco farmers, so that it would go out there. They were producing quite a lot of wine in those days. Never did they think it was their main business. It was always a secondary thing, and they were mostly making it for friends and family. But Dad grew up with them doing this, and as a young boy, he would help pick the grapes and help make the wine, and then they would bottle the wine or put it into big containers, and then Dad would get in the truck with Granddad and off they'd go out west and sell it to all the tobacco growers, along with fruit that they were growing here. So by the time he got to, his late teens, he'd made a decision by then that he wanted to become a commercial winery. He was thinking maybe there's an opportunity here to make wine more commercially than just the way his father and grandfather were doing it. During that time, his mum, my grandmother, became very unwell. And by 1968, Dad and Mum had met. They got married in 1968. And my grandmother was so unwell, they decided they had to sell the farm and move to Brisbane for treatment. And my father and mother and my uncle bought the farm off Granddad. And that's kind of when it started. 1968, they bought the farm. Dad made the decision, that's it, we're changing what we're doing. We're going to become a commercial winery. He pulled out all the grapes that Granddad and great-granddad had planted and started replanting wine grapes. So the first vines went in, Mum and Dad planted them in 1968, and they were Shiraz vines. And that's kind of where I guess the modern part of our story started, was on the day that Granddad sold the farm to Mum and Dad. And our path changed from then on.
Okay. And just on your father, Angelo, so I understand, but people know him as the father of the Queensland wine industry. And what did he always see himself as following in his father's footsteps and taking over that enterprise? Did he have other aspirations ever? Was he a big dreamer, or was there just that devotion to the family cause that when, circumstances outside his control came into play, he went, my duty is to the family and the continuation of this wonderful little plot of land that we've got going?
Well, you would think that, but talking to Dad, he had other ideas. He
Yep.
wanted to be a pilot. He wanted to be a mechanic, but my grandfather wouldn't let him go, and wouldn't let him study. My auntie, his sister, wanted to be a school teacher, but Granddad wouldn't let her continue school. They had other ideas. My grandfather was a very strong-willed man. I'm pretty sure he and my grandmother would have argued about that a lot, because I'm pretty sure, from what I know of my grandmother, she would have wanted the kids to, study more and have opportunities outside of the farm, but Nunu wanted them on the farm. So they were really not given the opportunity to do anything else. And I think Dad just went, well, right, if this is my life, I'm going to do it my way. And then that opportunity came up to buy the farm and do it his way. And that's why, sometimes I think to myself, it's so sad. Dad pulled out everything that Granddad and great granddad had planted, which is kind of ripping out some of our history. But he was 25, and it was his choice, and I think it was just his way of putting his stamp on it and making it truly his own. And then I think that's where his passion started. It was not following on from their legacy. Yes, that gave him, but he was starting something completely new, and no one else in the Granite Belt was doing it. There was some other people thinking about it, but he was the one at 25 who kind of put his money, which wasn't very much, where his mouth was. And I'm sure people in the region thought he was mad. My uncle got out very quickly. He just said, no, I don't want to be a part of this. So Mum and Dad bought him out in the early 70s, and he actually bought a farm across the road over the hill. He was a stone fruit farmer and table grape farmer. And for a long time, I'm pretty sure Mum and Dad thought, well, you know what? He was smart. He got out, and he had a very successful farm while Mum and Dad struggled trying to make wine and sell wine. I think the biggest learning for them was in the early 70s. No one wanted to buy our wine. And that was the bit that they hadn't counted on. Dad started winning medals. He was putting his wines into shows. Our first gold medal came from Brisbane for I think it was a Shiraz Cabernet. We won a gold medal in 1974. So that kind of put him on the map. People were going, what's this young bloke doing up in the Granite Belt? He thinks he can take on the winemakers of the rest of Australia. And he just continued, had absolute belief in what he was doing. And I think that's the way Robin and I grew up. For a long time, I suppose I had no idea that they were struggling as hard as they were to sell the wine, because people were coming to the front door. Robin and I were apparently, I had some customers here not very long ago, and they said that I took them on their first ever winery tour. And I said, when was that? And they said, you were 7. So I was 7 taking winery tours. And my grandmother, who didn't speak much English, my mother's mother, was looking after the cellar door. In fact, the room I'm sitting in at the moment was the original cellar door, which is now one of our offices, and, a tiny little room on the edge of our shed, and people would come and buy wine. I just grew up thinking that that's what we did, and that's what lots of kids did. And it's the same with drinking wine. We were always allowed to have a little bit of wine, but we drank it like our grandparents did, and they drank it with water in it. So I was a lot older before I realized that people didn't drink wine that way. I just assumed they all drank wine with water in it, like Nunu and Nonna did, like we did. It was, I think back and I had no idea we were a little bit different.
So your father,
everybody else, my cousins were like me.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so your father, we've established he was a battler, he was innovative, and he took opportunities by the scruff of the neck, and he worked them. Meanwhile, there's you. So you were born and bred in the Granite Belt area.
Yep.
Tell me a little bit about that. Growing up in the Granite Belt as the daughter of the father of Queensland wine, what was that like? And paint a little bit of a picture for me.
Well, I suppose you'd have to say as kids, it was a bit of a struggle. You know, my sister and I were expected to do a lot of stuff for mum and dad. They couldn't afford people to work with them. And, you know, at the time, it's hard when you're young, particularly when you're a teenager and you've got friends who are like, oh, you know, we should be doing this. We should go to the pool. We should do this. And, you know, Robin and I were working on the farm, or we were selling wine in the cellar door, or we were washing bottles, or we were, you know, in the wintertime, I learned to graft with my grandfather. He was teaching me how. We were working all the time. And I think back at it on it now and go, well, it wasn't that bad. But, you know, it wasn't back-breaking stuff, but it was just all the time. You know, and you've got friends your own age who were not doing what you're doing. But I guess, you know, in hindsight, we were helping grow the business. We just didn't know it at the time. You know, Robin and I would look after the cellar door. Mum and dad bought us a little swimming pool one year, and we'd be in the swimming pool and customers would come and mum would yell out, you got to go to the cellar door, girls. So we'd just wrap ourselves in a towel. We'd be dripping wet and we'd run over to the cellar door, serve a bit of wine, have a bit of a chat, sell a few bottles of wine, and then run back to the pool. So, you know, it was a little bit of an unusual, I suppose. You know, not every kid was selling wine by the time they were 12 or 13. But, you know, I look back and go, it wasn't so bad. And we had our grandparents here and, you know, life was pretty good. But, you know, I know now how hard it was for mum and dad. You know, it was hard on them. We couldn't do things that other kids were doing. You know, we couldn't go on school excursions and stuff like that. And the excuse was always that we had to do work. We had to work. You know, mum and dad needed us. You know, in hindsight, we know now they had nothing. They had no money. And Robin and I were, I guess, a bit shielded from that. We didn't know that they had no money. We weren't allowed to do a lot of things, but we didn't realise it was because mum and dad were struggling so hard. And then, you know, it couldn't have been too bad because I look back in my yearbook in high school when I graduated in grade 12, you know, they always put, you know, Leeanne is known for this, Leeanne is known for that, Leanne's ambitions. And it said, Leeanne wants to sell Stanthorpe wine to the rest of the world. And that was from some other kid had written that about me. And it's, well, I obviously was banging on about it even back then.
It was in your blood from an early age.
This was what I was going to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I just always, I wanted to be a winemaker. That was it. I'd gone to high school because we went to both the high schools. We went to the Catholic high school up till year 10. And then had to go up to the state high school. And, you know, I was the only kid in the science, only girl in the science class, and the only girl who didn't do typing, and the only girl who didn't do home ec. And I had a plan. I was going to be the winemaker. Not until I got to 11 and 12 over at state high that I realised my math skills are crap and I am not a scientist. So chemistry was really hard. And we had by then already an employed winemaker on site, Rodney, and he was not that much older than me. He'd only not long graduated from uni, and I'd be in the lab with him all the time, which by that time, this room was then the lab. We changed it from being the cellar door to the lab. This room's had a lot of history in it. And he just one day said to me, Leeanne, you're just not going to be a winemaker. And I'm like, but I am. I'm going to be. Like years I've been talking about being a winemaker. And he said, you're not logical enough. You don't get it. And you're just not going to get through university. And I didn't listen to him. I said, no, you're wrong. I'm going to. And then I failed chemistry in high school. And it just got harder and harder. And I went, okay, I've got to do something else. I'm not going to be a winemaker. And so I studied business instead and went off to uni and managed to get through 1 year and went, yep, this is not for me either. I just want to get back to the winery. And mum and dad said, no, go off and do something else. Again, not that they didn't want me here. They really couldn't afford me here. And the other reason was that they never, like Dad said to us many times and other people, he never ever wanted us to regret being at the winery. It had to be our decision to be there. And, so I became a travel agent. all the jobs that I wanted to do came back to Stanthorpe. Within 3 years, I had a job in Stanthorpe at the local travel agent, and then I met my husband, and then that was it. I was back, and we had our first son very early, and I quit my job in town, and I said to Mum and Dad, that's it, I've got a kid now, I'm coming to work for you. And I would do a couple of days a week. And I suppose those first few years where I was just part-time, because, the baby was, he'd been a bit unwell when he was born. He was born very preemie. And so I couldn't be here all the time with him. But I was fine. There was me, my mother, and my grandmother all looking after this baby while we're trying to run the business. So it worked out well in the end for all of us. And and that was it. I kind of ended up being here. And Mario's story is interesting too, because he's actually a glazier by trade. He was working in town at one of the local glassworks. And in those days, when you got to 10 years, you didn't have to pay long service. You could sack someone. So that's what they did. And he lost his job after 10 years working in that business. And we were going to start our own business, glazing. We were going to move to Tenterfield. And Dad said to Mario, look, vintage is upon us. I need a little bit of help. You've got a few weeks before you start your own business. Why don't you come and help me out? And that was 30 years ago. And he's our production manager. And,
he never left.
It's our life now, the one. No,
he fell in love with something.
Don't think with wine.
We'll go with that.
With wine. So, it worked out well. And, one of the things that's worked really well in the business is that we all have our distinctive roles. So Mario was able to take over the winery side of the business, and Dad could concentrate on what he loves, and that's growing grapes. That's his place. He just wants to be out in the vineyard on a tractor all day, every day, tending to his vines. So that's his happy place.
And he still engages in that active vine management still these days?
Every day he's out there.
Yep.
Every day.
How does that work, big picture, a family working together on a commercial project? I've seen it, and a great example of it, I think, is the wine industry. As I explained before, one of the reasons I'm attracted to it. I've been involved in family businesses, but nothing quite like what I see you guys running. Logistically, relationship-wise, give me a little bit of a picture of how that works.
It can be hard. It can be hard. And we know how lucky we are that we all work together as well as we do. We have our ups and downs, but like I said, everybody's kind of got their role. And, the roles can overlap. Like Robin and I do a lot of similar things, but then Robin, if we had titles, which I suppose you should have in a business that's as big as ours now, but she would be our CEO. She that's the bit she loves. She loves doing the business side of the business. Whereas me, I'm happy out in Cellar door. Leave me out there talking to people all day.
You're pretty good.
My forte. I do a lot of public speaking. I also take on the roles. We have a lot of roles on boards and stuff. So I took that initiative about 20 odd years ago. Dad was stepping back. He didn't want to be so involved in industry organisations. So he said, well, Leeanne, you can do that. So I've been in various positions, tourism, wine industry. At the moment, I sit on a national committee for representing Queensland. And I do a lot of that kind of stuff. And I guess that's our family's way of giving back. If we can put in a bit of time, I can put in some time working with these organisations to help the industry grow or tourism grow. Or, for example, at the moment, I'm on the board trying to get a dam built in the region. If we can contribute that way, that's kind of a good thing that we can do as a family. And that's one of my roles. But Dad loves his vineyard, so we leave him out there. He's got his vineyard manager. She works with him, and they keep an eye on everything. Mario manages the winery. He works with our winemaker, making sure that the wines get to where they need to be. They're in bottle, they're in boxes, they're labelled, ready for Robin and I and the team up in the cellar door to sell. So yeah, it's works well. Like I said, occasionally it's difficult. We may have an argument or a disagreement. I come up with lots of ideas that my sister poo-poos, so we manage that. That's okay.
Throughout the
but
course
I think
of
that's family business, and
yeah, that's family. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's right. But you get over it. It's like, well, I might get my way one day. I'm just got to keep banging on about it and prove why I think it's a worthwhile or a good idea if we're going to change something. But I've just been away for the weekend, and we stayed at a fairly well-known tourism destination in southeast Queensland, and they've won lots of tourism awards. And I was up there, and I said to Mario, you know what, Dale, I reckon we actually have a pretty good tourism offering ourselves. Mum and Dad have worked hard. We're open 7 days a week. From the day that they opened their cellar door, we've always been open. If they weren't here, someone else was here. And, the offering that we give our customers, we hope, is a good one. And, I travel a lot to other wine regions, and I think we have a lot to offer people, not just Ballandean Estate, but the whole region. And hopefully we've contributed to that in some way, by the work that we've done in our own business and the work we've done within industry. So, yeah, it's we're pretty lucky. It's a great place to be, and the industry is always changing. People sometimes will come in and go, oh God, Leeanne, you're still in the cellar door. Don't you ever get tired of saying the same thing? I never say the same thing. Every year there's a new story to tell. Something happened last year. Something's different this year. We've got a new wine release. Our winemaker had a moment and he's created something new. There's always something new to talk about. And that's what you have to do. It's not reinventing your business, but it's just adding things to your business that keeps people coming back. They want to know, what's the next story? What did you do this year? What's new? And so our story changes all the time, and that keeps people engaged.
So a slight tangent before I push further down that line of thought. Do you ever, throughout the course of this personal journey of yours, have you ever gone back to Italy to reacquaint yourself with your family heritage there, your Sicilian background, and does that inform the way the winery operates and functions today at all?
Well, we've all been back, and Mum's side of the family is actually from the north of Italy. So we're quite lucky that we've got our Sicilian heritage and we've got our Trevisani or Venetian heritage. Mum's family is from just outside of Venice. So we've been to both places, and where Mum's family is from is Prosecco country. So we drink a lot of Prosecco when we're there with the family. And Dad's family, in Sicily, well, wine it's just what you do in Sicily as well. So we've been lucky. And yes, I suppose so. Having Italian heritage family is very, very important. And I'm lucky, Mario, my husband's family, is Sicilian as well. So he kind of gets it. We often say being Italian's always interesting. They get you with the guilt, and they get you with the, being Catholic helps the guilt bit as well. And I don't know, there's just this respect that happens. You respect the older people in your family and you want them to be part of your business. It's not like we're trying to get rid of Mum and Dad. I just couldn't imagine the place without them. And I think that's the way I grew up. My grandparents were here till the end, till they weren't here anymore. But they were here in the business with us, whether they were looking after us or whether they were, I don't know, Nunu used to do the grafting and stuff like that. It's very important. And I think our heritage has helped us get to 4 generations and hopefully a 5th generation in the family business. It's funny, I spoke to a lady who was doing a paper on why is it that family businesses with European heritage have a very different perspective on where they want their businesses to be. And we both kind of said, I think that's it. We couldn't imagine our business without our family, without our parents and grandparents in it. My son Stephen's coming back to join the business. He's not coming back to take over or to, get rid of one of us. He's coming back to join us. And I think that's one of the differences. It's not about, okay, it's our turn now. It's not our turn yet. Mum and Dad are still actively involved in the business. Why would we want to change that? And I think going back to Italy makes you realise that, because the families over there are kind of the same, and it's their expectation that we would still all be here together. It's great fun. Can't wait to go back.
That's wonderful. I really like. I think it's something that you hear a lot from probably mostly these days European culture. It's a big Catholic thing also, but being part of something that is a lot bigger than yourself and understanding your role in that big machine or entity. In sports parlance, the name on the back of the jersey is far less important than the name on the front of the jersey. Get in line, kid, as Dad used to say. Let's talk about the
and that's kind of,
sorry, go on.
That's the way it is. Yeah. No, I was just going to say that's exactly the way it is, and whether it's a respect for your elders thing or whatever it is, it's just in you. You just get it. Like Murray is saying, he could, I often say to him, I've got two bulls, Dad and my husband, like this, sometimes working in the business, but it's a respect thing, and Mario gets it. It's like, well, Angelo is the boss. So, at the end of the day, if Dad says no, it's no, and we work around it. So, and sometimes he says yes, and we go, oh my God, now we've got to do it. So,
let's talk about the granite belt. So the history of the wines, the wine culture, blossoming at the moment. So I've been drinking a little bit of granite belt wine recently, and I'm absolutely loving it. A common theme that I hear from people is people older than myself who've been drinking wine for longer, go back. They weren't always that good. There's something really special happening in the granite belt at the moment. Can you give me a taste of that history, but also from the lens of your family's experience? So your grandfather, your father, Angelo, you come along and you become actively involved in that. What have you seen and noticed, I guess, of the trajectory of the quality and the direction of the winemaking industry in the granite belt over that period stretching from the start through to where you are now, and how that has impacted the direction of the wine industry in the granite belt and that Stanthorpe area?
Well, it is an interesting story because, like I said before, we won our first gold medals in 1974. So we've never, ever quivered about the quality of our wine. Yes, there might have been the odd year where the quality wasn't as good. And yes, when there was more than just a couple of us, there were wineries producing wine that weren't that great. But, I can take you to wine regions today and show you wineries that don't produce great wine. It's not a granite belt centric thing. It's every wine region has got wineries producing less quality wine. To me, it's more of the fact that our customers didn't know what we were producing. They didn't understand. The people who got it, got it. And for a very, very long time in Australia, if you didn't grow Shiraz and you didn't grow Cabernet, Chardonnay, Semillon, and Riesling, you weren't legit. They were the 5 varieties. And when Dad planted grapes in the 60s, he recognized that very quickly. And he chose those 5 varieties because that's what Australians drank. And for the next 20 years, we had other varieties growing in the region, varieties growing on our farm, but we were producing Shiraz Cabernet, Cabernet, Shiraz, Hermitage, Claret, they were wines made from those varieties because that's what Australians wanted. What we know now, is that the Australian wine consumer has certainly grown, and I think they've grown with the Granite Belt. And now they come to the region and they don't want to see Shiraz and Cabernet and Chardonnay only. They want to see what is growing well in our region. And I think that's what's happened. 20 years ago, all of a sudden, Australians kind of went, oh, you know what? There's more to wine than just Shiraz and Cabernet and Riesling. There's all these thousands of other varieties that are growing around the world. Why are we not growing them in Australia? Well, we were growing them in Australia. We just weren't telling people, or we were blending it out or whatever. And I think the birth of Strangebird in the Granite Belt has really, really opened up people's eyes to what we're doing in the region. And now they come to the Granite Belt and they want to see that our Shiraz is different to the Barossa. For years in the 80s, people would go, oh, I only drink Barossa Shiraz, or I only drink Shiraz from McLaren Vale. And Dad would say things like, well, it's that way. Go to the Barossa. If that's what you want, you're not going to find it in the Granite Belt. And people used to think that that was rude, that, oh, you just can't make wine like that. Well, yes, it's true. We can't make wines like that because we're not the Barossa. We're the Granite Belt. And regionality in the early 80s and even to the late 80s was not a thing. The winemakers knew it was a thing. I mean, that's why the French use the term terroir. There's nothing else like that word that describes your place, where you make wine. And the Granite Belt was different to everywhere else. Now, that's what people love about the region, that we are so different and that you are going to find wines that you can't find anywhere else in Australia. The perfect example, our Saperavi. The Saperavi variety Dad planted 16 years ago. The specs looked right. We chose it because it grows in a cooler region. It's late flowering, early ripening. There were all these things that Dad wanted in these new varieties that we chose 16 years ago, and that was one. And now we're listed in the top producers in the world of that variety. And people still come to the Granite Belt and they kind of go, oh, you're right. We are listed in the top producers in the world, not just in Ballandean, in the world. Mm-hmm. And that's what people are realizing now, that the quality has always been here. It's just was different. And it took a long time for people to kind of catch up. And that's the way I like to see it. It gets a little bit kind of offensive when people say to us, oh, the quality of the wines is just so much better in the last 10 years. Well, actually, the quality of the wine's been there a long time. It's just taken a long time for the consumer to catch up with what we're doing.
Mm-hmm. And what I found stunning, or what I am finding stunning recently in terms of the wines I'm drinking, are those cool climate varieties. So I've loved the reds, but the Fianos, the Gewürzes, those cool climate crisp whites that I'm finding the expression that they're getting given in that Granite Belt area is the best wines I've had recently. Really, really enjoying them. In terms of the varietals that the team is selecting to plant, cultivate, grow, etc., what goes into that? So you're looking at the terroir of the Granite Belt, and is there a push towards cooler climate? Because I had a very interesting discussion with you when I was lucky enough to call into your place about the elevation, the very specific geographical context of the Granite Belt that really gives it an advantage when growing certain grape varietals.
Yes, so like I said, when we chose the Saperavi, we did the same decision making with our Derif. Dad's got some very specific requirements that he wants, and they're the varieties, since we've planted them in the last 16 or so years, that we're having huge success with. So finally, we're at a stage where we can now choose varieties based on our place. Like I said, early days in the 60s, Dad recognised early that if he was going to sell wine to people, to the Australian wine consumer, he had to choose the varieties that they knew, not anything new. Anything new they would have poo-pooed. Now, we released our first Malbec we were trying to work this out the other day. It's got to be, we reckon, 30 years ago. And our winemaker at the time had seen it in Europe being produced a certain way. Dad had planted Malbec here in the 70s. He wanted to see what it would grow, how it would grow in our soils. And we had a little block. And Adam Chapman was our winemaker at the time. And he said, I want to make a Malbec like the ones I've just seen in Europe. And Dad said, go for it. Give it a go, see what happens. Well, that little wine ended up in our bargain barrel because the customers coming into the cellar door were going, oh, no, we're not going to, no, don't want to taste that. No, never heard of it. Why would you grow that? We'd only been growing it for, 15 or so years. And it was successfully being blended into the Shiraz they were drinking. They just didn't know it. And Adam was so disappointed. This wine was amazing. In fact, we had a bottle of it not that very long ago that we found in one of the cellars. And, even as a 30-year-old wine, it stood the test of time. It was a great wine at the time. And no one bought it because they just didn't understand it. Whereas now you put a Malbec out the cellar door and boom, 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 everybody wants it. It's new. Oh, is that South American variety? No, actually it's French and we've been growing it here since the 70s. And, we thought it was really, really new. So people didn't know what they didn't know, I suppose, back then. And now the Australian wine consumer is much more interested in where the grapes come from. Why did we choose to plant it here? They even want to know how it grows. They are way more interested than they ever were. So even in the cellar door, we need to know the answers to the questions that they're asking. And it's just so exciting because it means the next time we find something new that we want to plant, we know we've got a market for it. Anything that is new, we will find the customers who are interested in it. So it's a very exciting time, particularly for the Granite Belt, but for the Australian wine industry as well, that the Australian wine consumer is willing and wanting these new things. So, I've got my eye on a new variety that I'm very keen to try. Dad's not keen at the moment. So we'll wait and see what happens. The problem with deciding that you want to plant something new, especially if it's very rare, it's an 8-year proposition. And by the time you order it from the nurseries, they grow it for you, you plant it, you wait 4 years to 5 years for the fruit to become, quality enough to produce your first vintage. And so that's 8 years already gone. And then by the time they get to 10 or 12 years, you're getting some good quality. So, that's one of the reasons, I suppose, vineyards are generational, because Dad's planting things now that he knows that my son Stephen will probably be managing in 40 or 50 years' time if he's still here.
Can you give me
great-grandchildren will be.
Without giving me too much information that you may not want to share, what's going on at Ballandean Estate at the moment? So you've just made reference to some new groovy things that you're very interested in. Given the change in, there's a completely new geopolitical context going on, international imports, exports that have been shelved given, big global events, COVID, etc. What impact have these things had on the way the awesome wine people work in the Granite Belt, yourselves, and the direction you're pushing things in?
So I probably said to you when you were here at the cellar door the other day that COVID has been the best thing ever for the Granite Belt. It really, really pushed us. And we've never experienced visitation to the region like it, not just the wineries, the accommodation, the attractions. The whole region has just been bustling for the last 18 months. I have to say the last month, we've kind of come down with a big hard thud. So we're not sure what's going on at the moment, what the people out there are thinking, where they're going, are they staying home? We're not sure what's going on, but, hopefully it's just a blip and we'll be able to continue on after Christmas. I think there's a few dates that are being, dallied around in front of us that people are very wary of, and we're hoping after those dates happen, things will get to a bit of relative normality again. But I think as far as awareness goes, we heard a statistic the other day at one of our wine industry dinners that between June and December last year, 80% of the visitors to the region were first-time visitors to the Granite Belt, which we knew that there was a lot of new people coming to the area, lots of new people that would tell us, it's our first time. We didn't know, had no idea there was this many wineries. The region is so beautiful. The accommodation that's here is stunning, but had no idea that the numbers would be that high. I would have guesstimated, maybe 40% of the people who were visiting were newbies, but the official stat says 80. So what we're hoping is that, of those 80% of first-time visitors, that many of them become regular visitors to the region, that they had such a great time that they're going to continue to come. And that, of course, means, we need to grow more grapes to satisfy the need and the requirement, because we just, at the moment, we've also just come out of 4 years of drought, 2 years of serious drought where we lost 10,000 vines. We've had to replant. But, as I said before, that's a 5 years away before I get to pick anything off those vines. So that's production that we won't have for a while. And, we're just all hoping that we have a bumper season this year to replenish our stocks, and that those people who visit our cellar door keep coming. We're in a very unique position in the Australian wine industry sense, because the majority of us here in the Granite Belt sell the majority of our wine to tourists and online. I talk numbers with other people in the industry around Australia, and they just can't believe the volume of wine that each of us sells through our cellar doors. We would have to be some of the busiest cellar doors in the country, I would reckon, particularly in the winter time, which is our main tourist time. People are here to experience the cold weather and, put a fire on and drink red wine, and they love it. But, we're quite unique in that respect. Not every other wine region is like ours. A number of us were exporting to China, and of course that's been a huge issue. Luckily for us, the tourists that came basically made up for the losses of our export market. We've been made aware that we won't be able to export to China for about 5 years, not even to entertain it, just don't even think about it. We know that our customers over there already found wine to replace ours, which of course is disappointing coming from another country. And the chances of us recovering that market are pretty low, we think. So when we get back on track and our production levels get back to relatively normal, we've had so much water in the last 6 months. It's crazy to think that we were in the situation we were a year ago. I mean, the region just looks magnificent, and they're telling us we've got another 100 mil coming in the next couple of days. Well, it's just unbelievable. Creeks overflowing and water in paddocks. It's just unbelievable to see the difference in 12 months. But hopefully that means that our vines will recover and that our production levels will go up. We've just got to keep those tourists coming, and we'll be looking into new export markets in time to make up any slack there. I think one of the exciting things about the Granite Belt is that because we all sell so much of our wine to tourists, there is so much opportunity for us to grow. One day when we all have an excess, we'll go knocking on the big retailers' doors and saying, look, we've got a huge market up here. People know our product. Maybe it's time you start considering putting one of our wines or two of our wines on your shelves. So to me, the future is very bright. I mean, tourism is the bit that we love. And like I just said to you before, I'll stand in the cellar door selling my wine all day, every day, if you let me. But eventually, if our if we get to production levels where we've got way more than we need, we'll definitely be chasing more export first, and then other opportunities around Australia.
Mm-hmm. You good people at Ballandean are very involved with your local community. I understand lots of events, lots of fundraisers, supporting different good causes. Tell me a little bit about that, your involvement.
So over the years, particularly, we're a family of Rotarians. So we're always helping out with the local Rotary clubs. And we started an event with the Stanthorpe Rotary Club. It'd be 29 years ago, Opera in the Vineyard. And we ran that event with Rotary for 27 years on the estate. And all of the money that we raised over those years was donated to various charities. And I guess over the years, you kind of get into that mode. You know, we like to help out where we can. So we do run events here with Rotary particularly so that we can raise funds for various charities. I mentioned earlier, my oldest son was born very premier. He was, not very well as a youngster. And so we've, over the years donated money to the hospital where he was born and stuff like that. So we do try and be involved. At the moment, it's all apple and grape. We're trying to do what we can there. We have an ambassador that we're working with, trying to raise money to keep the event going. Robin, my sister, has been on the board of running the Snowflakes event for the last few years. So she puts in a lot of time and energy into making that event happen.
What is that event?
So Snowflakes, in July, every second year, we guarantee snow because we make it. And it's really a children's festival, but it brings lots of people to Stanthorpe. And that's what we want. If the first exposure to the granite belt is the Snowflakes event, and then the mums and dads come back and do the wineries, well, then that's got to be a good thing. So we do try and get involved in as many events as we can, and help out if we can, if we can be on organising committees or whatever. But even just participating in them, being there with our wine and supporting them. So, yeah, we try and help out as much as we can.
Mm-hmm. Your personal wine journey, what has been the highlight, the most enjoyable moment for you personally?
That's a tricky one. I often talk about my first memory that I have of my first wine industry memory other than here in Ballandean. And I remember as a little girl, we reckon maybe Robin and I were probably 8 or 9, something like that. And Dad used to go down to Adelaide every year for the wine industry conference for a few years when we were about that age. And, he'd rock up and go to the conference just like all the other winemakers in Australia. And he made himself known. He was the winemaker from Queensland, and lots of people still today, whenever I'm down in South Australia, go, "So Angelo, how is he?" I remember when he used to come down as a young fella, and he just got to know everybody. And one year we were down there and he met one of the Morrises, Mr. Morris, and the current owner's dad. And he invited Mum and Dad to his winery in Rutherglen and said, "On your way back to Queensland, why don't you pop in and come and say good day?" And I remember it was a big deal for Mum and Dad. The Morris family, a very well established wine industry name in Australia, and we were going to their place. And Mum had said to Robin and I, "Now they're going to give us lunch. Whatever they serve us for lunch, you just eat it and say thank you very much." And we got there, and Mrs. Morris had made us tomato soup, of which Robin and I hate. And Mum just looked at us like, "What did I tell you? Don't embarrass us now." And so Robin and I ate the soup, drank it down, shoved the bread down so we didn't have to taste the tomato, and we got it down and it was all good. And then Mr. Morris said, "Okay, let's go and have a look in the winery." So we went down to the winery, and I reckon I could still take you to the very barrel that he took us to. And we went to the barrel, and he pulled out this tool that I'd never seen before. And because, I used to hang around with Dad in the winery all the time. I thought I knew what was going on. And he put this thing into a barrel and scooped it out. And I suppose over the years I've romanticized it a little bit, but I remember thinking he pulled it out and it was this stream of beautiful, like toffee colored something. And he was pouring it into a cup and the light was beautiful and it just looked gorgeous. And I remember thinking, oh, wow, what is that? And he went to hand it to Dad and Dad went to grab it and he said, no, Angelo, girls first. And he gave it to Robert and I to stick our finger in. And it was 90-year-old muscat. And I just remember thinking, oh my gosh, he said his father or grandfather or whoever, someone in their family had started making it. And it was the base muscat for all their muskets, of which they're so, so famous. And, Robin and I got to stick our finger in at first and it was that old and beautiful. And, I just keep that was my first memory outside. And I think I was a bit hooked after that. It was like, well, it's not just Daddy who does this. There's other people in Australia who do it. It must be something special. And that was probably one of the coolest things that happened to me as a child that I think influenced why I made the decisions I did as I got older. And it was pretty special. I've told David Morris that story a few times, who's the current owner there. And he's like, well, one day when you come down to Rutherglen, we'll go see if we can find that barrel. I'm pretty sure I could find it.
Armed with a mug of tomato soup as well.
Yeah, tomato soup and bread. Ooh, still don't drink tomato soup.
That is such a good story.
Yeah, it was a good memory, that one.
Mm-hmm. Leeanne, you've been enormously generous with your time. I'm going to ask you one more question to tie this off. So your experience, we've spoken about your family's history, your grandfather, your father and your mother, yours. You've studied and you've seen the growth of Ballandean wines and of the Granite Belt region. What perspectives does that give you as a person? And what sort of advice, I guess, if you've got let's say, for an example, you've got a son coming home who's about to step into the family business, what advice? I mean, we've discussed themes of sacrifice, making the most of opportunities. And one of the things I love about vines and grapes is there's so many sort of personal allegories and metaphors you can draw from them and apply to life just generally. What advice would you give to a young person today who's seeking to seek out an opportunity and make the most of it based on your personal experiences in the vineyard and the wine industry?
I think, what we often say to people who come into the cellar door and go, oh, we want to start a winery, we want to grow grapes and we want to do this. And because they come as tourists, and they see it looks quite glamorous. And I think what you have to remember is it is a huge commitment. It is a long-term commitment. And, take the information that people are willing to give you, be open to learning from all sorts of people. Over the years, I've learned all sorts of things from cellar doors that I've visited, from vineyards that I've visited, people that I've met. And you've got to take on all that information and try and apply it in your own business. And don't be under any illusion that it's easy. It's not easy to grow grapes. It's not easy to grow them well. It's not easy to sell wine. And I think, you've been talking about a story. You need to have a story. People that's what they love about coming to wineries. And that's what I love about going to wineries. And people think we're crazy on my holidays. We're often in another wine region tasting and drinking and buying wine. But it is our passion. It's what we love to do. So I'm quite happy to do that. It's a hard one. I think a young person wanting to be involved, just take all the information you can and apply it the best you can. And don't be under any illusion that it's an easy road. It's not an easy road. Even today, mum and dad started with nothing. There was no one here making wine, and they kind of established it. Well, here we are 50 odd years later, and it's still hard work. But it's fun. It's always changing. There's always a new story to tell. It's never, never, never boring. So I love it. There's I'm sure lots of young people out there who see what we do and go, yeah, that's too hard. But there's other people who'd be up for the challenge, and we'd welcome them with open arms, particularly if they come into the granite belt. The more the merrier.
Wise words and absolutely beautiful thoughts. Leeanne Puglisi Gangemi, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you so much for sharing your family's history, your story, and the wonderful history of you awesome people at Ballandean Estate. Can't thank you enough. And I really look forward to future conversations that you and I are definitely going to be having. Thanks again.
Anytime, Thomas. Thank you so much.
No, absolutely wonderful. Leeanne Puglisi Gangemi believes in the value of family and the value of making the most of opportunities. Thank you again.
Thanks.